What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. During your playthrough of any of the Pokemon games, there will always be a time when your Pokemon are low on hit points, power points, or have a status infliction that makes it too difficult to continue with the rest of your playthrough. The Pokemon games include a variety of different ways that you can heal yourself, but what if that wasn't an option? Today we're going to find out how easily you can beat Pokemon Red and Blue without ever healing. So I know that the immediate comment is going to be, come on John, so many people have done videos on this topic. No Pokemon centers, no items, no healing during battles, it's all been covered. Now, typically I would agree with that, but this is a much different kind of challenge. When I say no healing, I mean no healing. If your Pokemon lose all their health, you're done using them. If they run out of power points, you better hope they learn a new move to replace it. The point of this challenge is to take on the game as if healing was never implemented in the game. To some this may still seem like an easy task, but you'll quickly learn how difficult this can really be. Before we begin the challenge, let me briefly mention every healing method in the game, just so we're clear on what can't be done in the challenge. The most obvious one is that we're not allowed to use the Pokemon centers to heal. Pokemon don't heal or restore power points when you put them in the PC in this generation, so that's totally allowed. Items that heal either your HP or PP can't be used, and you are not allowed to use any self-healing moves, or moves that give you HP like Leech Seed or Dream Eater. I'm sure there's something that I'm missing here, but the point I'm trying to stress is you can't heal in any way. I want to note ahead of time that you can obviously gain HP when you level up, but that's a mechanic that's baked into the game. With all that out of the way, let's find out if this is possible. So starting out, I want to say that this challenge was pretty difficult to throw together. This is one of those challenges where you have to create some kind of game plan before you even start the game. There are just so many little things that you have to consider, especially when healing your Pokemon is such a huge mechanic in these games, so it's extremely helpful to plan ahead as much as you can. I'll obviously cover all that when the time comes, but for now, let's talk about our first big issue: picking our starter Pokemon. This is definitely one of the most important choices out of the entire challenge, as it basically determines how difficult you want the entire challenge to be. The hardest choice by far is Charmander. This whole line is notoriously awful in Generation 1, and although it has potential to be helpful in some upcoming sections, the first couple of gyms completely wall it, so the only realistic choices that we have here are Bulbasaur or Squirtle. Both of these Pokemon have positives and negatives to them. Bulbasaur covers the first two gym leaders, if it will last that long, while Squirtle is really only useful for the first one. Personally, I think Squirtle is the best for quite a few reasons, and you'll slowly see my reasoning as we progress. The first mandatory battle that we have is with our rival. This is one of the very few sections in this entire game where you're healed at the end of the match, and because there's no way to avoid this in the storyline, it really doesn't matter what happens. You should definitely try to win because of the valuable experience, but I ended up losing, so that definitely makes this a lot harder in the long run. After returning the parcel and receiving Pokeballs, the first thing I did was try and fight some wild Pokemon. I immediately regretted this decision as I lost half of my health in only one battle, but rather than resetting the game, I chose to run with it to see how far I could really go. With our new access to Pokeballs, I was able to catch a Rattata and Pidgey, which I used to try and switch train Squirtle to a more manageable level. After they were both knocked out, I released them and then went west to Route 22 to test my luck with some stronger Pokemon. In this grass, you have a 10% chance to encounter a Spearow, which is arguably the strongest Pokemon aside from your starter at this point in the game. Its catch rate is about 35% at full health, which is very important for a couple of reasons. If we damage a Pokemon, that damage will carry over once it's added to our party, which means that we're immediately at a major disadvantage with every opponent that we fight. In addition, the Pokemon we use uses power points and is also at risk of getting damaged as well, so it's best to just throw a ball and test your luck. After catching two Spearow, we can head north of Viridian City and begin our training process in the Viridian Forest. There are quite a few trainers that we can fight here, but it's best to avoid the ones that we can because at least one Pokemon off of each team has a chance to poison us, which is basically a waiting game to lose. Because Squirtle only has access to Tackle and Tail Whip at the moment, it's important to try and gain as many levels as possible before taking on the first gym. Thankfully, there's a very efficient way to go about this. In this area, there's a 35% chance that you'll encounter either a Kakuna or Metapod depending on the version that you're playing. These Pokemon are only able to use the move Harden every turn, which means that we can fight them without ever having to worry about losing any HP. Because I want to preserve Squirtle as much as possible, I chose to switch train with the Spearow that I caught earlier. I know some people will probably mention that this is a simple way to complete this challenge. Use Pokemon to train other Pokemon. I initially thought that this was the golden ticket to breezing through this challenge, but there are quite a few things that you have to consider. In the process of getting Squirtle from level 5 to level 8, Spearow had to use over half of the packs that it had, and that number drastically increases each level that you progress. The simple answer would be that you can catch another Spearow, but money is very scarce in the beginning of these games. At most you can get around $4,000 if you sell everything that you find, which is only enough money for 20 Pokeballs. Eventually you're going to have to use all of Spearow's power points to earn one measly level, which is stupidly inefficient, so you have to try to be as conservative as you can within the early stages of the game. Once Squirtle reached level 8, it learned Bubble, which is a good starting stab move, but it also has 30 power points, which beats out every other starter by a lot. Bulbasaur only has 10 power points for Vine Whip, and the next move it learns after that is Razor Leaf at level 27, which definitely won't happen. Now that Harden is even more useless than it was, I used a few bubbles to bring Squirtle up to level 10, before taking on the bug catchers in the area. I didn't even gain a level from any of the battles, which means that I'm going to be heading to the Pewter City Gym under-leveled. I also lost one of my Spearows to poison, so I really didn't have a backup idea if Squirtle couldn't take on the fight by itself. Brock's team is centered around Rock-type Pokemon, so with a couple bubbles I was able to take down Geodude, and thankfully Onix used Bide rather than Tackle, which resulted in us only losing about 10% of our current HP. Now that we've collected our first badge, things should get a lot easier now, right? No. Route 3 contains 8 trainers who have Pokemon that range from level 9 to level 14. Granted, you can skip some of these, but there are a minimum 4 trainers that you're required to defeat in order to progress. I initially tried to take them on with the 2 Pokemon that I had, but this was a terrible decision. You need to have a somewhat decent team to get through this, so after a few attempts I went all the way back to Route 22 to catch another Spearow and a Metapod on the way back to the route. I spent a little bit of time grinding Spearow to level 8, which is basically the bare minimum to scrape by because a lot of the Pokemon here are bug types. The second trainer is by far the scariest, as he has a Rattata that guarantees the first move with Quick Attack, and Ekans who has Wrap, which doesn't allow you to attack for 2 to 5 turns. After getting through him, Squirtle evolved into Wartortle, which really only helps with dealing more damage, but it also learned Water Gun the level before. This move is twice as strong as Bubble, and it adds another 25 power points that we can try to use. By the end of the route I lost Metapod, which isn't a big deal because I got him solely to take hits from my other Pokemon. Past here is some wild grass, which I used to catch a new higher level Spearow before releasing my fainted Pokemon. Our next location is going to be Mount Moon. Although this area can still be relatively difficult, there are a few things that really help make this a lot easier. The most notable thing is that the Pokemon in this area are a lot higher than Route 3, as you can catch almost everything at level 12 on the lowest floor. All of them have over a 20% catch rate with Pokeballs, which made it possible to get 2 Geodude and Clefairy as I made my way through. Because there are multiple Moonstones you can collect in this area, I chose to immediately evolve my Clefairy into Clefable. When it comes to trainers, there really aren't that many that are mandatory, but the ones that aren't very easy to take down. The first big trainer is the Rocket Grunt that's guarding this pathway. He has a Rattata and Zubat, which are once again annoying because they can chip away each Pokemon by using Quick Attack or Supersonic. Geodude helped wall Rattata before the rest of my team took care of Zubat, but I ended up losing Spearow and Geodude up to this point. Our final big challenge for this area is going to be the Fossil Maniac. His team consists of 3 Pokemon that we haven't faced until this point, and they each have the potential to give us issues. Grimer and Voltorb can be stopped by a Geodude because they only know normal type moves, but Coughing is extremely annoying because it has access to Smog. Not only is this move Stab, but in this generation it has a 50-50 chance to poison your opponent. I ended up having to sacrifice Clefable to get through this point, but it definitely put in the work for this match. From here we can pick out a fossil and leave the area, but I chose to stay around for a bit longer to grab some more Pokemon to rebuild my team. I caught another Geodude, Zubat, and Clefairy before making my way to Cerulean City. Now is when the challenge really kicks in. Cerulean City and the routes surrounding it play a decent part of the story for these games, which mean there are a lot of battles that we have to take on. I mentioned earlier that I tried to plan ahead on a good portion of this challenge, but I had no idea how ridiculously difficult this section would actually be. The first and arguably the hardest battle in this area is going to be our rival. His first Pokemon is a Pidgeotto at level 18, and if you can't tell by the tone of my voice, it basically mopped my entire team. Because of its level and that it's evolved, it's faster and stronger than everything but Wartortle. It has access to Quick Attack, but to make things even more annoying, it will spam Sand Attack relentlessly until you have to force yourself to switch into something else. At this point, an overwhelming majority of my team is around level 10, while our rival's lowest is level 15. The obvious solution to this issue is that you should just grind out your team, but since we're unable to go to Mount Moon after hopping the ledge, the only area that we can go to is the eastern section of Route 4. Because all of them can attack back, quite a lot at that, we're basically in a standoff between our rival and the wild Pokemon. I decided that my only true option was to rebuild my team, so I released a Spearow that I had because it ran out of Pex, and I caught a new one on Route 4. I decided to let my new Clefable take on Pidgeotto and lower its attack with Growl, before letting Geodude take care of the rest. His next Pokemon is Abra, which is a freebie because it only knows Teleport. But now we have to take on the most powerful Pokemon in the game, Rattata. Words cannot properly explain how frustrating this Pokemon can be. You're probably saying, what's the big deal? This Pokemon is horrible. Oh, how wrong you are. Because Rattata has a base speed of 72, it can outspeed all of my Pokemon without Quick Attack. This isn't a huge deal because I have some Pokemon that can tank a few hits, but that doesn't matter at all because at level 14 it learns the move Hyper Fang. If you don't already know about this move, it has a 10% chance to miss, but in turn it has a base power of 80. This move is also normal type, which makes it stab, and for the cherry on top it has a 10% chance to flinch. But I wouldn't have figured that out myself because it one-shot my entire team. The solution I found is that I had to max out my Geodude's defense with Defense Curl, and pray that I didn't get a single crit. I'm very confident in saying that this battle is pretty much impossible without doing that for the team that I brought into the battle, but even after all that, you still have to beat his starter Pokemon. Although I won, I had an extremely unlucky battle, but I was too afraid that if I tried again, I'd never beat it, so I had to say goodbye to Clefable, Geodude, and Spearow. But on the upside, at least we're done with the hard part. Now all we have to do is head north here and meet up with, yep, we're screwed. The Nugget Bridge is another mandatory section, but this time there are 5 trainers, and then the Rocket Grunt at the end that all vary in difficulty. Without going into super extensive detail, this was not very fun. Each battle felt like I was fighting my rival siblings, and as a result, my team had at least one new member every single battle. The worst trainer by far was number 3, who had, you guessed it, a Rattata with Hyper Fang, and then an Ekans with Wrap. By the time that I reached the end, I caught 6 Spearow and 2 Rattata, and almost half of them were lost in one battle. I know I'm glossing over this section, but to put it in perspective, I honestly thought that this wasn't possible halfway through. But on the upside, we did end up receiving a Nugget from the Rocket Grunt, which will all go towards getting more Pokeballs. Past here is Route 25, which is more tedious than difficult, but this was the area where Wartortle fought his last battle. I was honestly shocked that it made it this far in the first place, but because it was our strongest member by a long shot, I had to catch 2 more Spearow to compensate for that. After receiving the SS tickets from Bill, we can head back to Cerulean City. Although we can now take on Misty, we're gonna pull a Professor Oak challenge strat and head through the Dig House to leave the city. After the battle, I had to catch my 14th and 15th Spearow before heading south of Cerulean City. Even though we have to take on Misty at some point, if you can come back with a stronger team and take less damage, you should probably do that. We also get access to routes 5 and 6, where I spent a little bit of time to catch Oddish, Pidgey, and 2 Mankey before progressing down to Vermilion City. Before we continue with any more of the story, we're going to make our team the best that it can be. And what better way to do that than the magical Diglett's Cave? At this point in the challenge, Diglett is probably the best Pokemon that you can get for this type of challenge. They're really fast, at a high level, and their catch rate is a 1 in 3 chance. The best part of all is that if you catch it between level 19 and 21, it has access to Dig. Because it will outspeed basically everything, you can deal a ton of damage and most likely one-shot whoever you meet. But wait, it gets a whole lot better. If you wander around for a bit, you have a 5% chance of encountering Dugtrio. For some reason you can find them between levels 29 and 31, which makes it useful for much more than Misty's gym. Dugtrio is the 5th fastest Pokemon in the entire game, so you can pretty much expect that you'll go first against whoever you fight. And because of how speed works in this generation, you'll be landing critical hits at least once per battle. The downside is that it only has a 7% catch rate at full health, so a lot of sacrifices were made to get one. I ran around until I could get 6 of either Diglett or Dugtrio with the move Dig, and I ended up with an even split of both. Granted, I lost all of my entire previous team and 2 Digletts for show, but the only thing that could make this team any better is 3 more Dugtrio. Since we're already in Vermilion City, I chose to take on the SS Anne now, which went a lot better than I expected. The only mandatory battle that you have to do is take on your rival again, and I managed to get through the battle without taking a single hit from his entire team. I cannot explain how relieved I was to get through this. After receiving the HM for cut, we made our way back to Cerulean City to take on Misty. Because Dugtrio is so much stronger than her team, I was able to get through this with only taking a little bit of damage off one of my Pokemon. Now that we have 2 badges, we should probably take on the Vermilion City Gym, right? While our team has the type and level advantage, I chose to just head east of Cerulean to Route 9. Because I know that gym will only get progressively easier, I chose to save my moves for some of the harder battles that we're forced to take on. Because none of my Pokemon can learn Cut, I went back to Route 5 to catch another Oddish. Route 9 and 10 contain a few mandatory battles, but almost every Pokemon that you have to fight is either a rock or poison type, so even the Digletts had an easy time. From here we can head to the Rock Tunnel, which can be surprisingly difficult because of some random Pokemon like Slowpoke and Bulbasaur, which can knock out your previously damaged Pokemon in one hit. I ended up having to knock out my Oddish, but I was only using it for Cut, so that wasn't too much of a big deal. After spending about 20 minutes in here, we exit and quickly reach Lavender Town. There isn't really anything that we can do here at this point, so I went west and took the second underground pass all the way to Celadon City. There are a couple things that you can do here, but for starters I went all the way to the top of the department store to buy a fresh water, and then brought it to the west guard of Saffron City. This allows us to head in and out of the city whenever we want, which we'll definitely need to do quite a bit of. Our next stop is the Game Corner. After battling the grunt guarding the poster, we can access the Rocket Hideout in the basement, which is filled with a ton of opponents. Thankfully, if you know your way around, you can get by with only fighting about 3 or 4 of them, but a lot of them can have really annoying Pokemon like Raticate and Zubat. By the time that I grabbed the card key and reached the door to Giovanni, my team was beat up pretty bad. His team is actually really easy because Onix and Rhyhorn are weak to ground moves, but 4 of my Pokemon had 3 HP or less, so I ended up losing 2 Diglett and 2 Dugtrio almost entirely to his Kangaskhan. After the battle, I picked up the Silph Scope and immediately worked towards rebuilding my team. I went to the roof of one of the Celadon buildings to grab an Eevee, which I thought was going to be super helpful. Jolteon learns Thundershock as an initial move, but I forgot that they don't learn those moves when they evolve in this gen, so I was basically just stuck with a fast Eevee after that. From here I went all the way back to Diglett's cave to replace my team, because even at this point they're arguably the best Pokemon to have on your team for a few upcoming battles. I ended up catching another 5 Diglett and a Dugtrio, but I lost one of my Dugtrios I already had, which wasn't too big a deal because it didn't have any more power points for Dig. The next storyline task that we have to take on is the Pokémon Tower. The moment that we head to the second floor, we have to take on our rival again, but this time he's come prepared. Over half his team gets swept by Dig, but the biggest issue is that he now has a level 24 Gyarados. Now normally through level up, it doesn't learn an actual water move until level 41, but because the game only accounts for the Pokemon and what level it is, Gyarados has access to Dragon Rage and Hydro Pump, which are default moves if you encounter one. This has the potential to knock out my entire team very easily, so the best option is to spam Sand Attack and slowly chip away until it knocks out. Considering that Hydro Pump starts off with 70% accuracy, this isn't too tough of a battle if you can get the first few off. I did end up losing Jolteon and a Diglett, but they definitely didn't go to waste. At this point we can ascend to the top of the tower, and on the way we had to fight a few trainers. An interesting thing to note is that because there are no abilities in this game, I only had to use a single Diglett for every trainer because ground moves are super effective against Ghastly's entire line because they lack Levitate. Upon reaching the 5th floor, we're presented with an interesting scenario. In the middle of the room there's a cleansing spot that blocks the path to the stairwell. This completely heals your entire team, which obviously defeats the entire purpose of this challenge. Thankfully Game Freak knew I was going to make this challenge video 13 years in the future and put a channeler next to the stairs. If we stand within our sight, we can just walk around the little gap after the battle. Although their locations reset when you re-enter the area, we're teleported out of the tower once we're finished. When we reach the top of the tower, we have to take on another pretty difficult section. There are 3 grunts that we have to fight here, and believe it or not, our biggest trouble is Zubat. Because we can't hit them with ground moves, we have to use Scratch, which leaves us vulnerable to being spammed with Confuse Ray and Supersonic. My luck was really terrible for this part, so I ended up losing 3 Diglett after about 30 minutes of trying. There really wasn't anything I could do because I wasn't able to get more Pokemon or I'd be healed, so I was just happy with making out with 1 Pokemon. After rescuing Mr. Fuji, we're given the Pokéflute, which will help us gain access to some much better Pokemon. But before we do that, we're going to need to rebuild our team. I went and caught another Diglett and Dugtrio, but I also had to grab the bicycle in Cerulean City because I wouldn't be able to progress the story without it. The goal for now is to get to Fuchsia City, and you can choose to head west of Celadon or east of Vermilion. Because the east side is filled with easily 15 trainers, I chose to avoid all that to preserve my very damaged team. If we use the Pokéflute, we can wake up the Snorlax that's blocking the path. Although it's level 30 and insanely powerful, I intended on avoiding it because it has a 3.4% catch rate. But I decided to give it a shot and I caught it on my second ball. Although this was stupid luck, if you're following along, you should definitely try to get at least one of these because they're a perfect mix of being strong and bulky. After skipping every trainer on the bike path, we reach Fuchsia City, which is home to our next gym. This gym is actually really terrifying for a few reasons. The most obvious is that this gym has most Pokemon in the mid to high 30s, which makes Pokemon like Drowsy and Hypno take 2 to 3 hits to take down. Snorlax came in clutch for a lot of these, but I ended up getting poisoned halfway through. Oddly enough, the trainers are actually more difficult than the gym leader. Koga's team may look very strong, but even though his Pokemon are almost 10 levels higher than mine, Dig is powerful enough to make quick work of them. I ended up losing a Dugtrio, but that was only because his Weezing used self-destruct, but that also secured the victory. With this badge, we now have access to the move Surf, but we have to grab it from the Safari Zone before we can use it. While I made my way to the end of the maze, I managed to catch 2 Rhyhorn to help out with some future battles. Because Pokemon don't get healed when you put them in the PC in these games, I made sure to store my Snorlax so it wouldn't take any more poison damage in case that I needed it for later. This means that I no longer have a surfing Pokemon, so I went to grab the Good Rod in the city and caught a Poliwag. I also made sure to give the gold teeth back to the Warden to get the HM for strength. Now it's time to improve our team. If we head south of Fuchsia City, we can follow the water path all the way to the Seafoam Islands. Although we're unable to use strength to solve the puzzle, we're still able to follow the stairs all the way down to reach any of the levels. This area contains a ridiculous variety of Pokemon that we can catch, and almost every Pokemon can be found over level 30. The top targets here are Dugong and Slowbro. They only have a 4% encounter rate on specific floors, and they also only have a 10% catch rate, but they can be found as high as level 39, so it's worth spending the time to look for a couple. I ended up catching Dugong, Staryu, Horsey, and Shelter, but I also caught a Slowbro that I'm going to save for later in the game. I also lost a Diglett and a Dugtrio to Dugong, but it was well worth the trade-off. A little side thing to note is that if you're really deep in the cave like I was, you can use Dig to escape. In later gens, the game will drop you off at the outside of where you were, but in these games, it drops you off at the last Pokemon Center that you healed at. Because I obviously haven't done that, it sends you all the way back to Pallet Town. This saves a ridiculous amount of time to get to our next location, because the Seafoam Islands blocks off our access to the other side of the water. If we head south of here, we can surf all the way down to Cinnabar Island. The Pokemon Mansion is our main objective, which we can get through really quickly and grab the gym key, because we don't have to fight anyone. The Cinnabar Island gym is very straightforward. We can skip every trainer if we answer all the questions correctly, but Blaine can still be a little bit of trouble even with our type advantages. His whole team is faster, which really isn't too foreign to us at this point, but Ponyta and Rapidash know the move Fire Spin. This has the same mechanics as Rap, which means that if it lands, we're going to be taking a ton of damage. I managed to beat him, but my team was pretty well dented by the end of it. I ended up having to lose Dugong, which was definitely the best member on the team, but my Horsey ended up evolving into Seadra, which helped balance it out a little better. Now that we're done with some of the later gyms, let's backtrack and fill out the rest of the badges. I started out by replacing my HM Pokemon with Pidgeotto and Tentacool, before grabbing one more Diglett to take on the next gym. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the Vermilion City gym was extremely easy to get through, but I also guessed the locks on the trash cans on the first try. No big deal. After defeating Lieutenant Surge's gym with a single Diglett, I made my way back to the bike path to grab the HM for Fly. Before we put that to good use, we're going to head back to Celadon City to take on the gym. This was equally as easy as Lieutenant Surge, as Pidgeotto's wing attack sweeped Erica's team. At this point we have 6 badges, but we're not able to get any more until we finish more of the Team Rocket storyline. To help out with our team, I bought 2 Water Stones, which I used to evolve Shelter to Cloyster and Staryu to Starmie. The technical final part of the Team Rocket story ends at the Silph Company in Saffron City. Although there are 29 trainers that can be fought in this building, only 2 need to be fought to reach Giovanni. Thankfully, they're also very easy to defeat, but before we take on the boss, we need to fight our rival. His team is basically the same as the one in the Pokémon Tower, but now that he has Alakazam, you have to play a lot more cautious because confusion can sweep your whole team. I ended up sacrificing Cloyster and Pidgeotto, which left me with a pretty beat up team. I decided to head all the way back to the Seafoam Islands to catch 2 more Staryu and Dugong, plus a Pidgey on the way back for a new flyer. Although you'd expect that Giovanni's team would be entirely ground-type Pokemon, his first 2 are Nidorino and Kangaskhan, which can be pretty annoying to take down. Because both of them still only know poison and normal-type moves, Rhyhorn was able to pretty much take care of both of them, before Starmie swept all the ground types. Once he leaves, we can obtain the Master Ball from the President, as well as a gift Lapras that could be helpful later on. Now that Team Rocket has left the area, we can finally take on the Saffron City gym. I decided to withdraw my Snorlax from the PC for this gym, but since the center is so far away, I lost a decent chunk of health. On the upside, the teleporters in the gym reset the poison ticks every time you go through them, which made it so Snorlax didn't take any damage aside from the distance that it took to bring it here. Sabrina's team is probably the most difficult gym to take on in the entire game, and that's solely because of how good psychic types are in this generation. Alakazam is definitely her strongest Pokemon, but even Kadabra and Mr. Mime can be a real pain if they use any of their psychic moves. To my surprise, Snorlax actually helped a lot in this battle. I was able to use Headbutt to take care of Kadabra, and Starmie did a great job of walling the other Pokemon because of its resistance to Psychic. Because trainers' Pokemon don't keep count of their power points, Alakazam can just recover over and over again, so you kinda have to get lucky and have the right Pokemon out that makes it want to use anything but that. At the end of the battle, I lost Rhyhorn and Snorlax, but I would have been more surprised if it made it out of the gym alive. Now that we have 7 badges, it's time to take on the final gym. Viridian City's gym is centered around ground-type Pokemon, and you're only required to fight 2 trainers. I ended up getting through it without taking any damage, but I'll admit that it was entirely luck that the trainers refused to use any damaging moves. Giovanni's team are finally all ground types, which makes this extremely easy. The only truly annoying Pokemon is Dugtrio because it's fast, but once you get past that, it's smooth sailing. I did end up knocking out 2 Starmie and Pidgey, but I didn't care about what happened to this team because it's time to rebuild our team for the rest of the game. The first place that we're going to go to is the power plant on Route 10. While it's pretty obvious what we're here for, I also caught 2 of the static Voltorb, which can be super helpful because you can find them at level 40, and they're insanely easy to catch. At the end of the path, we can take on our first legendary, Zapdos. This is definitely one of the most tedious parts of the run, because we all know how hard it is to catch any legendary with full health. I upgraded to Great Balls, which are oddly enough the best for catching Pokemon due to a weird oversight, but that still doesn't change the fact that it has a 1% catch rate. This took a couple tries to do, but it only took about 5 minutes for me to catch it. I did lose Rhyhorn, but once again that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Our next task is to grab the other legendary bird in the Seafoam Islands. Articuno did take a little bit longer to catch, but I've had regular encounters take longer than 20 minutes, so this was pretty smooth all things considered. There isn't really much more to say here, because the entirety of this was me pressing the A button until the game finally worked in my favor. After the battle, I stuck around for a bit longer to catch Shellder, Seadra, and Dugong to help out with one last battle. If we head towards the Pokemon League, we'll have one final battle with our rival. This was surprisingly a really difficult battle, but that's mostly because I didn't want to use any of the Pokemon I've been saving to use for more important battles. I ended up having to use Zapdos, which made the battle take like 2 minutes to do. Dugong got knocked out, but at this point, we're almost done assembling our final team. After heading through all the gates, we can enter Victory Road to grab a couple more Pokemon. This is once again another one of those places where you can skip every trainer, so although it seems like this would be a tough section, it's honestly one of the easiest in the entire game. After solving a few strength puzzles, we can take a staircase down to collect the final bird, Moltres. Because we have our Master Ball, I use that to immediately add it to the team. I know some people might wonder why I chose this one and not the other 2 birds, and it honestly doesn't matter at all. They all have the exact same catch rate, so you can pick whichever one you want to use it on. Before we leave the area, we're going to catch a Graveler as our final Pokemon, before heading to our final challenge. The Indigo Plateau is the gate to the end of this challenge, and I made sure to plan my team as well as I could to have the best advantage. My team consists of Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Slowbro, Graveler, and Voltorb, which I evolved into Electrode after using a rare candy that I picked up. I do want to mention that I grabbed some TMs on the way through the game, which helped make this team a lot better than it already is. Without going into too much detail, I picked up Thunderbolt, Psychic, Thunder, Blizzard, Fire Blast, and Earthquake, which are all either gifts from gym leaders or items that you can pick up through different storyline tasks. The first member of the Elite Four that we have to take on is Lorelei, and personally I've always considered her to be the toughest one out of them all. Zapdos was able to take care of basically everything with Thunderbolt, but Jinx is the only thing that can cause trouble. Moltres is the best fit to fight it, but Jinx somehow was able to outspeed and use Ice Punch, so as long as it doesn't get a critical hit, you should be good. Bruno's team consists of rock and fighting types. Zapdos once again helped to take care of Hitmonchan and Machamp, but Slowbro did most of the work by either using Surf or Psychic to one-shot her whole team. Agatha is by far the one that requires the most luck. Because her team is full of Glass Cannon Ghost types, Graveler's Earthquake knocked out Haunter and both of her Gengars. The only thing that you need to watch out for is if they land Hypnosis, because once they start healing with Dream Eater, the battle is basically over. Zapdos and Slowbro took care of the rest, but this is one of the easier battles if you're dealt the right cards. Electrode faded into this battle, but it was really only added to my team if I was ever in a bad position. Lance is the final member of the Elite Four, and I would be lying if I said that this was difficult at all. Gyarados is quad weak to Zapdos, and Articuno's Ice Beams are super effective against his Dragonairs, and quad weak to Aerodactyl and Dragonite. I'm not even lying when I say that this was the easiest battle in the entire challenge. This battle took a minute and a half to finish. But now it's time for our final battle. Our battle with our rival is known as one of the hardest champion fights in the entire series, and all things considered, our opponent has the upper hand. Zapdos was able to take care of his Pidgeot with Thunderbolt, and as long as Alakazam doesn't crit with Psychic, a Drill Peck will knock it out in one hit. Articuno's Ice Beam is quad effective against Rhydon, and Gyarados is once again quad weak to Zapdos' Thunderbolt. Arcanine can be a bit of a challenge because of how surprisingly bulky it can be. Slowbro dealt a pretty solid amount of damage, but I honestly lucked out in this matchup because he healed instead of attacking me. His final Pokemon is his starter, Venusaur. This Pokemon is weak to literally every Pokemon that I have left, but Articuno was the one to help finish off this battle. And with that, we've successfully beat Pokemon Red and Blue without ever healing. But how did I do? So let's review. After I registered my team in the Hall of Fame, I finished with a time of 11 hours and 15 minutes, which is pretty ridiculous to think about. The amount of planning that I had to make in the beginning sections of this challenge made it feel like it took a lot longer than it actually did. There were a ton of little mistakes that I made along the way, so if I'm being honest, I could do this in about 9 hours or less now that I know the best way to go about it. I don't want to take away from the fact that this is still an insanely difficult challenge. There are quite a few points where I honestly believe that you couldn't make it past a specific section, but I think that's what really made it fun. It makes you think outside of the normal conventions of the game, and although it got frustrating at some points, I was able to experience the game in a pretty fresh new way. If you're interested in trying out this challenge, tweet me your progress and your final times at Johnstone YT. Other than that, that's all there is to say about beating Pokemon Red and Blue without ever healing. And that's gonna do it for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing, as I'll be making more content like this very soon. If you have any suggestions for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter to keep updated with new videos as they come out. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.